So let's move on to Queer as Folk.
Yes.
You developed and executive produced the U.S. version of the show
Right.
for Showtime in 2000. So
Right.
talk about how that came about.
Well, after Sisters, we developed a show called Leap Years, and we sold it to Showtime. And at the time, Showtime was more known as a place where you took passion projects. I believe Dustin Hoffman took a movie there to direct. Someone else would do a series that they maybe broadcast wouldn't want. We took Leap Years there. And Leap Years was horrifying to us because Leap Years took place in 3 different time zones during the course of each episode. And we would lie awake at night saying, how in the world are we ever going to do this? We're thinking maybe hiring 3 different writing staffs, past, present, and future. Remember that?
It was so complicated, we couldn't do it.
So we forged a relationship with the people at Showtime, and at that time it was all Canadian financed. So we had to find Canadian financing, which we did, and we had this company who was going to finance the show. We were going to set up the production office, and the night before, or the day before, 2 days before, it was like a very Friday, Monday we were going to set up the production office. They pulled out all the financing, and the show was dead. So Ron and I were, of course, devastated by this, and we said, you know something, we haven't had a vacation in a long time, let's go on vacation. So we went to Italy, France and Italy, for 2 weeks. And we came back, and that Sunday in the LA Times, there was a cover story, the best show that you will never see. And it was all about the show called Queer as Folk, that was the British version. And they said, HBO is thinking of doing a movie version, Showtime wants to do a series, but it'll never be as graphic as that show. It'll be watered down. And we read this article. We went out to, I'm getting to you, Ron. We went out to lunch with our agent, and coming out of office, I think it was at Beverly Hilton, is that where it was?
Beverly Wilshire.
Beverly Wilshire. And at the other table near us was Jerry Offsay, who was the president of Showtime at the time, and we had worked with. And he came by the table, and
we said we saw this article. And would you consider us for that project?
because Leap Years is over.
Yeah, and so it was one of those instances of being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes that happens. It's happened a few times for us, knowing Deborah All when they were looking for someone to write an early Frost. We've been very lucky at certain times in our career. And other times it's,
Unlucky.
unlucky. Like everybody, I guess, if you don't go away. So we were lucky. We happened to be at
Jerry
lunch.
Jerry Offsay said, well, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So that's really how we got it.
So you had not seen the British
No.
series
Not at all.
before then. So
No.
then what do? You watch it, or do you
They
just...
sent us the videos.
We watched it.
We watched it. And
we were shocked out of our minds by what we saw. We couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But, we...
Did you
Well,
have any reservations
no,
once you saw
not
it?
really.
No.
No, when we write, we're very brave. We do not pull back. This was something we thought was a rare window of opportunity. And I remember saying to Ron, this will never come around again. And
Like
it won't.
early Frost.
It won't. And this is our opportunity to do this. We have to be as bold as we possibly can, have courage, and do it. And it was exciting to do.
It's when somebody tells you, oh, you're never going to be able to do what they did. Well, of course, what it does to you, it just inspires you to prove them wrong and to go beyond what they imagined. So we said, not only will we match it, we're going to even push harder and further if we can. And that's what we tried to do.
And Joel Schumacher was attached to it as a director and executive producer. And I remember we had to go over to Joel's house, and he had to approve us, which he did. He eventually left the project to us. So.
Yeah. And why was Showtime the right place for this show, do you think?
It was And was certainly the underdog to HBO. I think they were trying to find themselves and make an impact, have visibility. And this was certainly a show that would get them a lot of attention.
But they also earned it because Jerry put in a lot of projects that got green-lighted, movies and whatever, about the gay community. So it wasn't just like, I mean, and also they were doing at the time, they did a series, an African-American series called Soul Food, which was based on the movie. They were doing a Hispanic, not Revolutionary Road, I can't never remember the title. Resurrection Boulevard. About the Hispanic community.
And they'd done a comedy series about two gay brothers, hadn't they? Or one gay brother and a straight brother.
No.
It took place in a bar or something.
They did Brothers. Was one character gay? I don't.
Yeah.
But anyway, they had earned. It wasn't like, oh, let's just do a gay show for attention. But it was so. I remember at the time when it was going on the air, we were interviewed and we were being introduced. And it was Ron and Dan, who are executive producers and creators of HBO's new show, Queer as Folk. And I said, wait, it's Showtime. And I remember the guy saying, "It is? Oh, it is. Oh, it's Showtime. I thought it was HBO."
They were definitely the
Underdog.
also ran, and they were trying to get, and I think they were trying to get attention.
Right. And was there censorship? Was there a concern about any censorship?
None.
They left us.
Whatever you wanted to
Their
say?
motto was "No limits," and they
And
left
boy,
us alone.
did we test it!
Yeah.
I have to say,
No.
we did.
No. We had a wonderful, wonderful
There was
executive.
no standards in practice.
We had a wonderful executive named Pancho Mansfield, who was completely supportive, who
And protected us.
Protected us, went to bat for us. He was amazing, and you had to have that kind of atmosphere in the show. You could not be tethered; it would have been a disaster.
Well, why do it otherwise?
Why do
you
it?
know? The whole point was to go as far as you could possibly go.
So talk about the overall TV landscape at the time when you were developing Queer as Folk, and especially the representation of gay characters.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do was have all of the lead characters, for the most part, except for the Sharon Gless character, were gay characters. And at the time, gay characters were represented as either eunuchs or clowns. They were they were sexless. They were worked in an office. They were the gay nephew.
Never to be laughed at.
And had no sexual life. And this was an opportunity to have characters who had a sexual life. It was supposed to be a celebration of gay life. Our youngest character, Justin, who takes us into this world, there's no thought of suicide or angst. He was very anxious to be part of this world. It was about the joy of being gay, celebrating it. That was the main thrust of it. Because gay people have been portrayed as people who wanted to kill themselves, jump in the ocean, hang themselves. This was not what the show was about.
No. I think to talk about Queer as Folk, the same as with Early Frost, it's very important to put it into its time period, what was going on in the country when that show was done. And that's why I made my notes. But I remember at that time, Bill Clinton had signed the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, which, was a federal law that marriage was between a man and a woman, and that if marriage was recognized in one state, and at that time I think the only state that recognized gay marriage was Massachusetts, so it said that marriage in one state did not have to be recognized by any other state in the country, and that marriage was between a man and a woman. He signed that. He also signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This was not a Republican president. This was Bill Clinton, who signed that bill as well. If you were in the military, they were not allowed to ask you if you were gay, but you were also not allowed to tell them you were. And if you told them you were, then you were dishonorably discharged, I guess. That was there. Sodomy laws were on the books still in 14 states. And President Bush made a speech in the Rose Garden saying that he wanted to have the Constitution of the United States changed to say that marriage is between a man and a woman. Okay. This was the world at that time that we were writing Queer as Folk in. So it was not a gay-friendly world. It isn't particularly now either, although, yeah, you can get married. But other things certainly have not changed, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But that was the world in which we were developing this show. So we had a lot to write about. And as the years went on, somewhere in the middle, probably around 2003, that's when Bush was elected. The show was more playful, more lighthearted the first couple of years, although there were certainly issues that we were dealing with. There was no shortage of that. There are plenty of issues that we were still dealing with, gay bashing and everything else that we dealt with. But after Bush was president, the world got much darker for gay people, and the show got darker and became more and more political because it had to be. It had to reflect the time that we were living in. This was a show that reflected the time in which it was written. And I'm sorry if it sounds immodest, and I don't mean to sound immodest, but I believe, and I know Dan agrees with me, that in the future, if people want to know what it was like for gay people living in an urban setting at the turn of the 21st century in America, that Queer as Folk will be a document of record.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about the process of developing it from the UK series. How much of it changed, and describe how you sort of created the series.
Well, Russell Davies, who created the British series, said to us at one point, you take this and run with it. Do what you want to do with it. Showtime said, well, we bought the series. We want you to use elements of it. And if you look at the series, the first 3 or 4 episodes sort of echo British. But towards the middle of the first season, we began to make it our own. One thing we did do, and I have Ron talk about this, was the psychology of the Brian character. The British series didn't seem to have a lot of psychology, and we did exactly what we did with Sisters, putting these characters on the board, trying to figure them out emotionally and psychologically. And we figured we needed to bring in, because Americans are much more psychologically oriented than the British, correct?
Oh, definitely. Since working in TV, we've gone back to the theater, and we've worked twice now in England doing theater. And very different mindset. I think for us, well, first of all, let's say that the British series, the first season was 8 episodes. The second season was a 2-hour movie. That was it. The American
Just 10
Queer
hours.
show, American Queer Folk show was 85 episodes over 5 years. So we used up the original material pretty quickly. We took a few storylines. The storylines that we did use, we changed considerably. Specifically, Ted, one of the characters, I don't remember what he was called in the British series, but he met a guy at a club, took some drugs, OD'd, and died. And we said, well, that would have been a good character. Let's not have him die. He can be hospitalized, but he'll recover, and we'll keep him on as a character. So we kept that character alive. We used the 2 women on the show, Melanie and Lindsay, a lot more in the series than it was in the British show. At the beginning, they just kind of served as one of them had a baby with Brian.
The Brian character.
And they were in it a little later, but not really developed. The Emmett character was in it fairly slightly. I think he had 1 episode where he was a character that they focused on a bit. So, and we used a few of the storylines and added to them. For instance, Brian and Melanie have a baby the way the characters in the British series did as well.
Lindsay and
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what did I? Brian and Lindsay
Mhm.
had a baby, the way the two characters in the British show had a baby. What we did was make one of the lesbians Jewish, and she wanted the baby to have a bris. And Brian got wind of that and stopped it from happening. He did not want his son to enter the world, and the first thing they were going to do was to cut off a piece of his dick. This was not going to happen, so Brian stopped it. Well, that's an example of what we kind of did with the British series. Ted did not die. We extended it to make one of the women Jewish and to have a bris, and that set off an enormous hostility between that character, Melanie, the Jewish lesbian, and Brian. And of course, there was the other problem that Lindsay and Brian, which we also did, that wasn't in the British series, had a long history in the past. They had known each other in college. They'd actually had a brief affair together. And that Lindsay still carried a flame for Brian, although it was very suppressed, and they never talked about it until later in the series. But part of her was always in love with him. So we took a seed of something and then grew something from it. But yes, the original seed was in the British show, and we give credit to that. But we used up those storylines pretty quickly and then went on. And I think what Dan was asking me to talk about was Brian's character, he was the main character, played brilliantly by Gil Harold, memorably. And he was a very complex character. He was a character that people detested or adored. There was no middle ground.
Which
with
we
that
loved, by the
character,
way.
and that was the intention, you know. We loved him. He was a great character for us, and we identified with him in a lot of ways, and what his philosophy was and how he felt about things in certain ways. He was an extreme individualist, and I think any writer would have to admit that since you spend your life creating imaginary worlds in which you're the boss, and that you have a strong drive as an individualist to create a world of your making and your vision. And that comes with the territory. So we identified with a lot of what he had to say.
And this is making it more psychological than it was in the British.
Yeah.
I mean, motivations for
Dan and
why
I
he did
have,
things.
never lived the life of Brian.
No.
Or we've never lived in West Hollywood. We don't have a life, we've never had a life of going to, bars and stuff like that. But anyway, Brian made it very clear from the beginning when he picked up Justin, who was a younger kid who was coming out and trying to find himself. And of course, the Justin character, who is 17, turning 18 at the very beginning of the show, falls in love with Brian. And Brian says, "Can I say the F word?"
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Brian says to Justin, "I don't believe in love, I believe in fucking." You get in and you get out with a minimum amount of aggravation and a maximum amount of enjoyment. Falling in love is something straight people tell themselves they're in order to get laid. And because they're lying to themselves and the other person, things get very unhappy, very complicated, very ugly, and it all falls apart. Well, he says, "I'm not interested in any of that, so I'm telling you right up front who I am and what I want. And if that doesn't appeal to you, then there's the door." He couldn't make it clearer, and he says it in a rather harsh way because Brian expresses truths in a very harsh way. But they are true. So he says that right up front, and that was a philosophy we felt this character needed in order for us to understand him. And then we needed to see the kind of home life he came from, with a father who was an abusive drunk, a mother who was a crazy Christian. And these were his parents. His mother said, "You're going to hell." His father would beat him up and then always go to, once he became successful, show up at his door for money so he could go to the bar and get drunk. So Brian did not have a good example of a happy home life. So we made him a more complicated character so that you could see his backstory, but you could also see how he felt about sex and love, which was to a great degree self-protection. But you understood why he was behaving the way he was and why he was promiscuous. Although I use the word promiscuous hesitantly because there was so much hostility toward his character from the gay community for his promiscuity. Dan and I have could say a lot about that, but just let me say that to me promiscuity means somebody who's getting it more than you are. So anyway, Brian was the main issue of the show with the viewers, but we took a lot from the British show, used what we could, and moved on.
Right.
And that was our assignment. That's what Jerry Offsay said. Use it, we bought it, use it, then go off and do your own show, which is exactly what we did.
Right.
Why did you set it in Pittsburgh?
The original one was set in Manchester, England, which was a secondary city, a working class industrial city. We were trying to think of a city in the United States that somehow mirrored that.
We didn't want to set it in New York, San Francisco, Chicago. There's a gay community in every city, but we didn't want it to be in a gay haven. So we wanted to be in a place where people would experience some conflict and some, questionable.
And
whatever.
also like an ordinary setting, not something that, not a coastal city, an exotic place like West Hollywood or the Castro or Greenwich Village and Chelsea, or, it had to be a real typical American
Right.
city.
A second-tier city.
Yeah, and that the people in it, were either working class, middle class. Brian's case, he was more upper middle class because he was the most successful person on the show. He had he was an advertising executive who eventually had his own agency and had a very glamorous life.
Right.
But everybody else, had a pretty middle class
Right.
life.
So talk about working with your other executive producer, Tony Jonas.
Tony was really brought in. He replaced Leslie Moonves at Warner Brothers when Leslie went to CBS, and we had a very nice relationship with Tony. Warner Brothers initially was going to finance the whole series. They eventually pulled out of it, and Showtime took over when it was successful. And Tony was really the person they wanted as a more or less not necessarily creative, but someone who was could get financing for the show.
He brought Warner Brothers in.
He brought Warner Brothers in
as the financing partner
Right.
for the show.
And Tony's a terrific guy. We got along with him great. He just wasn't someone who was going to be there running the show. He just wasn't.
He came up once a year, I think,
Yeah.
to visit and say hello to everybody.
Yeah.
But he was more the business end
Yeah.
of it, not the creative
A
end
lovely,
of it.
lovely
And a
man.
very nice man.
And you shot in Toronto, correct?
Yes, 5
And
years.
so you were up there
Yes.
for the whole,
And
Yes.
so was the lead cast.
yeah.
Yeah, we all moved up there
Yeah.
for, 8-9 months a year.
Hmm.
So talk about the main characters and casting the show.
Well, let's talk about casting. Casting the show was very difficult. The first casting session we had with Linda Lowy, who was our wonderful casting director, the first person to come in was Hal Sparks, got cast immediately. Second person who come in was Scott Lowell, to play Ted, immediately. Peter Page came in, actually before Scott, because he came in to read for Ted. And I just like, the parallels between Sisters and Chris Folk is uncanny. just like Patricia Callenber wanted to read for Teddy, the same name, and she ran out, and I ran after her and said, would you read for Georgie? Peter read for Ted, and I ran out after him and said, would you read for Emmett? Which he did. So the first day we had 3 of our characters. I said to Ron, this is the easiest casting we've ever done. That was the end of the easy
And the
casting.
2 women?
They came in a couple of days later, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that
were
usually when
great.
you go to casting, they weren't there the first day, but it doesn't matter. We go to casting, they said we're going to see 30 people. And a few you get an NA, meaning not available, for whatever reason. So Linda would call us and say, okay, your casting session's at noon, come. And we're seeing 30 people. And we'd go there, and 27 people, they were NA.
They didn't show up.
The agencies didn't want them in the show. There were guys who came in, it was so interesting, they'd say, oh, I really like that shirt. Yeah, my wife bought it for me.
Well, can I stop
Yeah.
you for a second? I want to make it very clear that the casting of this show was so impossible. It was so difficult, so unlike Sisters. Not one agency sent anyone in for the show, actors or writers. They wouldn't touch our show. I think actually one actor came in from William Morris, from our agency. No other agency sent anyone, and our own agency sent one actor, and I'd like to make that very clear and be on record for that. And that goes for the writers. It was so hard, although they did send in writers, but the actors,
It was an untouchable project.
It was an untouchable show.
And we had, so we found Randy Harrison we had a casting director in New York, and we couldn't find anyone here, and she kept saying, I can't find anyone. Finally, Ron and I said, could we see the tapes ourselves?
People would send in tapes of themselves.
No, that's not what happened.
We thought
What,
we got a
no,
tape of him.
No, they would come into her office and she would tape them. And she had she'd have the
Right,
each
right.
day. So we would go through, and finally we found Randy, and we said, well, why wasn't he even considered? And that's how Randy got the part.
She didn't send us his tape. We said, could we see the ones you
Right.
didn't send us?
Right.
And that's how we
Yeah,
found
her
Randy.
recommendations were nothing what we saw for the part. The most interesting and the parallel to Seal Award, we could not cast Brian. And the show was supposed to be shot between, I think, April and September, because Canadian winters are very harsh. We could not cast this part, and we kept pushing it back and back and back. So ultimately, we shot from September, late August through March. And just to jump ahead, we would write these scenes with these great-looking guys. They're all very physically fit, and they're walking down the street, and that's how we wrote the scene. And of course, when the dailies came in, they were in mucklucks and scarves and earmuffs
10
and
below
mittens.
in a snowstorm, and you're saying, oh,
So
wow.
we could not cast the part of Brian. And finally, we had to go into, what you do is you bring your picks, and usually you have to bring 2. Even though you want 1, they want to see 2. So on Monday morning, we had to go in at 7:30 in the morning, because Jerry Offsay was taking one of his children to a college for an interview. And he said, I have to leave by 10. You come in at 7:30. And I remember going in there, these people were, our cast was lying on the floor outside his office. He hadn't arrived. But anyway, so this was Friday, and we were supposed to go on Monday, and we had no Brian. We had one actor who said he would do it, but only for 1 season. And we said no. I said, what if the show's a success? How are we going to get rid of our leading man? So it was 4 o'clock on a Friday, and Linda Lowy calls and says, he's here. I said, what do you mean? He said, he's here, Brian's here, come see. So Ron and I had a meeting where we just left, we just fled, jumped in the car, went to her office, and there was Gail Harold, and he read the scene, a couple of scenes, and we just looked at each other like, Providence. I mean, this person was so perfect. And we said to him, we didn't give the British show or our script to anyone except the Gail, because Gail had the most to do in terms of the graphic nature, the sexual nature. We gave it to him, and we said to him that day, he said, well, can you come on Monday at 7:30? And he lit up a cigarette after his reading. No, can't come. What's the matter, Gail? What do you mean? He said, well, I'm with this theater company and we're striking the set. The show's closing on Sunday and I have to strike the set.
I'll be there all night.
I'll be there all night. I can't come. So we convinced, so he said, Gail, here's the script. Here, please think about it. And the next day, Ron and I we're writing, and we get a call, and Ron picks up the phone and he says, hello. And on the other end it says, hello, this is Brian Kinney. And that's how we got Gail. And Gail went in. He was brilliant. In fact, Showtime runs the show for, I call it our Christmas Carol, because every Pride Month, every June, they run the whole series. And we hadn't seen it in years, and we watched a lot of it this past year. We hadn't seen it in so long. And everyone was wonderful in the show. Gail was just extraordinary. And I must say that despite the difficulty, what Ron said, the difficulty, we were blessed with a charming, wonderful
But these
cast.
actors, I don't think, none of them were with a major agency.
No.
Linda said, I'm looking at agencies I never heard of. The Bread and Butter Agency?
Like Buttercup Management.
She said, who are these people? She was.
Excuse me, Buttercup Management. I don't mean to put you down, but it was something we'd never, usually CAA, ICM, whatever,
Randy had no agent. I don't know that Gail had.
Gail and Randy had never been, well, Randy had just graduated from college. Gail, in fact, someone told me that he had bought a book about acting for film, and he, in his little hotel room, he put down little markers, and he was, Gail had never been in
knew how
the
to
show.
act and get to his
But I'll
mark
tell you
on
something.
it.
When Joel Schumacher was involved in this, he said, I want this to be done in Jersey, and I want this to be done with sort of these sort of macho Italian. And I said, you know something? This show is going to shock people. And the only way to get through is to have the most charming cast you could possibly have. And that's what we did. And I'll tell you, jumping ahead again, this didn't happen on Sisters. The first day we shot Queer as Folk, I said to Ron, I feel like we've been shooting this for 2 years. Everything was in place. Everything the cast just fell into place. It was remarkable. Eventually. It was remarkable.
And talk about how Sharon Gless got involved.
Sharon was doing a play in Chicago, and she had a friend who's a casting director, and he said,
well,
you tell.
Barney and Sharon's assistant was now Jerry Offse's assistant, Carol. And she said to Jerry, what about Sharon Gless? That was the smallest part in the pilot and the last part to be cast. We all decided, let's just put her aside. We can find somebody for that part. And Carol said to Jerry, what about Sharon? And Jerry said, that's a great idea. And he called us up and said, what do you think of Sharon Gless? And we said, fantastic, just the part. She was doing a play, as Ron said, in Chicago, and she somehow got a script.
From a casting director friend of hers,
Right.
who gave her the script. She read it. She said, oh, this is trouble. I got to be part of this.
And on her own dime, she came back. She was in a run of a play.
She came in, and she was looking like Debbie, who was a very eccentric character. She came in as close to the character as she could be. And she was fantastic.
And Sharon, first of all, Sharon's a wonderful, amazing person. She's a fabulous actress. But what Sharon has is a great big heart. And that heart is what made that character. I mean, she can be snappish, and she can be witty, and she can be sarcastic, but that heart is always there. And there was never anyone considered for the part but Sharon. And she loved doing the show, I think. She really did. And she always says to us, I think she did one of these archival things too. She had gotten a little heavy, and I remember she wasn't getting any parts. And Barney said, I'm just aping what she said, echoing what she said. Barney said, they never forgive the blonde, because she was the shapely blonde. Tyne Daly didn't affect Tyne Daly, but it affected her. And we loved what she looked like, and it gave her confidence again, really.
And she said, Ron and Dan gave me my career back, that they restarted my career by giving me this part.
Yeah, and she loved it, and everybody.
And she went on to other series from there.
Oh yeah,
But very interesting. Our cast to this day, in fact, I think they're all having a lunch for a charity
Oh, they're still, yeah.
next week or in a couple of weeks.
And we're
out
not
here.
invited?
No. Well,
Anyway.
we're writers.
Yeah.
Anyway, who wants to write?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, they're still a family after 20, almost 19 years. They still hang out together. They still see each
They
other
play
all
poker,
the time.
weekly poker games.
They so bonded. Now maybe it's because we shot in Canada, so we weren't part of community. We were all away from home for so
But I
many
think for
years.
everybody in the cast, this was the biggest thing, the most important thing that they ever did. And they were all so brave, and the courage of doing the show. The right
Yeah.
people came to us, despite
that was
the
the
difficulties.
thing. To do this show, you had to have a real commitment to the material, to gay people, to what it was
Exposing
saying.
yourself emotionally and
'Cause
physically.
these people did stuff no actors had ever done before.
I mean, actors have done one-offs. You know, yes, you can do Brokeback Mountain. You know,
With-
that's great.
yeah, but
this is a series doing this for 5 years, you know, and most of it fell on Gail, and he
And
was just
Randy.
and Randy, and they were just troopers. And we did that first scene. I remember that very first scene of theirs where Justin goes back to Brian's loft and he pours the water over his head and they have the sex scene. That was one of the first scenes we ever did. And I remember saying to them, you know, you were going to set the bar for this entire show. And they did magnificently. They were just incredible. Which we can talk about led to all these sex scenes. And that was
Yeah, we'll talk
another.
about that.
Yeah. That's another
I'm
issue.
sure you want to ask about that. Yeah.
So the public was very curious about the actor's actual sexuality in real life. What
Mm-hmm.
did you make of that curiosity? And some actors were willing to share that, and others
It was
weren't.
the actor's choice.
Yeah.
And Gail Harold and Scott Lowell, who were both straight, said we do not want to express our sexuality until the show is on the air because we don't want to, you know, we don't want to take away, you know, there's so much. We've had actors on the show who are straight. And they sort of said, you know, it's like, I'm really straight. I'm just doing this. I don't really want to do it, but it's a job. And they were too committed. They loved the show. They loved the show, and they loved the characters, and they did not want to be distracted from that. And the gay characters, you know, it's interesting. Peter Page said, you know,
The gay actors.
I mean, the actors who were gay. Peter Page said at one point, he said, you know, people are always saying, oh, this must be really difficult for a straight guy. He said, I'm gay. It's difficult for me. It's not easy for me to take off my clothes and, you know, simulate giving a guy a blowjob or rolling or getting
Listen to
fucked.
us,
You know.
the way we talk. That
Oh, this happened. That once we were traveling from Toronto to Los Angeles, and we were in the air, and we were always writing, and so we're sitting there at the scene, and I'm saying, now wait, Ron, please, in this scene, no, he shouldn't get fucked. What he should do, he should get blown, and then he should do that, and then we looked up and we saw everyone around us. We're like, what? I said,
We're
oh my
working.
God,
We're
we're working. Yeah, that's what Ron said, like Jack Benny, we're working.
so
Anyway.
we experienced things we never thought we'd experience in our life. It was, I think, what went on off screen was far more
Oh, the dildo. Tell me about the
more
dildos.
interesting and hilarious and insane than what went. But the beautiful thing about the show is there are straight people, there are gay people, men, women, everybody, different ages. And because of the nature of the material, you had to sort of leave your good manners at home because you had to talk in a certain way, deal with certain situations that we were portraying on screen, and you could not, you know, it wasn't Downton Abbey. What can I say? So we found ourselves at the beginning trying to still be very polite and not use words like that, especially in front of women and straight people. And we're self-conscious. Everybody was very self-conscious.
The staff.
At
and
the beginning is, I think, what was going on, including doing the sex scenes, which we'll talk about later, and how we did them. But we'd have these meetings in an office, and we'd be talking about the script and what had to what we had to shoot and what they were saying. And little by little, you start loosening up and you start talking in a way you've never heard yourself talk before. This happened in the writer's room too, which became, you know, sort of like a group therapy session. It opened us up in amazing ways that we never expected or knew, because you were writing a show that was so extreme. You couldn't hold on to your manners after a while. You had to give yourself over to what it was about. So I will tell the gross story. I've been given that assignment by the boss. Anyway, there was a scene where we needed a lot of dildos. It was a scene, I imagine people are turning this off already, right? They're not even going to hear the rest of what I'm saying. So I guess it doesn't matter anymore.
Go for it.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a scene when Ted, the character who overdosed on drugs, was in a coma. They thought he was going to die, and his mother was going to go to his apartment to clean out his apartment because they said he's in a coma and he's never going to wake up. So she went to, she went to his apartment to get in pajamas because she refused to believe he was going to
No,
die.
they haven't.
Right?
They didn't. No. What happened was they said his mother's going to come. It was Michael and Emmett who said we have to get there first and get all of his porn, because he was into porn.
Get
His
all
porn,
the stuff
his-
out of
right,
the drawers
before the mother comes.
Before the mother arrives, because she doesn't know he's gay, or even if she did, you don't want to go through your son's drawers and find the stuff that's in his drawers. So we had to go out and buy. We had to send one of our, our little office with the
Staff
one of
person.
an intern who's probably 20 years old. So you're gonna have to go to a sex shop in Toronto, and apparently Toronto is the world
Sex capital of the world.
the
Really,
sex
sex
shop
capital.
center of the world.
It-
Who
it-
knew?
It is. It's like the sex capital of the world.
Anyway, you got to go to one of these shops, and you got to go buy us a whole bunch of dildos, and then bring them back, and they decorate. We're gonna have to decide what to put in the drawer. So she takes a pillowcase.
Exactly. And comes back with like 30 dildos, all shapes and sizes, colors.
They
the
lit
whole
up.
thing.
They spun. They shined in the dark. I mean, you couldn't even
Right.
believe.
Walked across the room. I mean, they did everything.
It's like, who knew these? Anyway, she takes the pillowcase and dumps it, and they fly all over the floor. So we're in there with the actors and the producers and the writer, and we're all playing when they say, "Oh, look at this! Oh, look at this one!" We're saying, do you realize what we're doing? We're making a television show, and we're sitting on the floor with this pile of dildos
And there was a huge dildo that you could stick on a suction cup.
and a suction cup.
And I stuck it to the wall, and while we're talking, it falls and smashes the fax
It
machine.
breaks the fax machine. That's the way, 10 pounds, and it had this little suction. It wasn't good. Falls on the fax machine and breaks it. So they had to get a new fax machine, and they put up a sign over the fax machine that was there for the rest of the series that said something like, "No dildos within 10 feet. This means you, Dan." So,
That's right. I was forbidden to go to the fax machine.
but the beautiful thing, even though the story is gross and silly, but the beautiful thing about it was it freed us all to be very open about ourselves, not just the way we talk, but about what we shared with each other, and not sex stories, but just
And took the taboo off of it, which was very
yeah.
important.
And all of a sudden, we could say things that we were never allowed to say, and express things we never could say, and certainly never in front of women or straight guys or anything, and for them too. But it freed us all
The
to
inhibitions
be
just sort of
very
melted
open.
away. We all were laughing, having a great time.
And
And that's how the rest of the show was.
And it was great therapy in a way, because you got to just let all that stuff go in a safe place where you wouldn't be judged. And only we knew. And the hard part was going back to the real world, because then you
like at the airport.
like at the airport, and you would
Right.
you would forget. Okay, Dan, we're not in the office
Yeah,
anymore.
we're not in
now
that-
we're
right.
in the real world. We can't talk that way. We
Right.
can't express ourselves that way, even to friends. So it really
'Cause
did
you're in that
interesting
world, and
things
that's,
to your head.
Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with what you were seeing on
Right.
screen. That was what was going on for all of us behind the camera.
Right.
And Showtime had a pretty unusual marketing campaign for it as well, something that hadn't really been done before. Do you recall that?
Well, I remember when the show was premiering, they hired an outside PR firm to do their poster art and their ads. And there was they spent a fortune, wide variety of images. And they found out, and this is interesting, they found out that what the public responded to was a black background, just said queer as folk.
Just
That the word
the
queer
word.
was all that they needed. And that's what they used at the beginning. And I think that when we did the show, the opening credits, we were insistent, at least I was insistent, that we not have credits at the beginning of the show. We did Sisters. Sometimes it bled into the second scene, starring, the casting, written by, and it just takes you out of the show. So I said, and a lot of shows did not do that at the time. We had feature credits at the end, which now all shows, most shows do. And I said, what we need to do, the editor originally, our original director, had put together sort of a mock opening. And it was with all these great-looking guys, great bodies, sort of grinding away in their Speedos. And Q, U, E like 3D, E, R came out to the audience.
It was very in your face. And that was the intention of the show. That was what we wanted to do. It was a show that was going to be in your face.
And the word queer was no longer a slur. The gay community took it back and owned it. So queer became, and this was the word that people responded to. They didn't respond to, there was a one poster that they did use, but it was sort of Justin having his hand in Brian. You didn't see their face. You saw their chins and their torsos, and Justin had his hand in Brian's shirt. And it was like, okay, we had other images too, but that was the image that they responded to. And I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, they did this promo called Are You Ready for Queer as Folk? And we were on it. Some of the cast was on it. And it was actually good because I don't think the world was ready for queer as folk. And
we weren't ready for queer as folk. We'd never seen it. We were shocked when we saw the British show. Completely shocked.
And it was funny you say that because when we had an event in Toronto where Russell Davies came in and they showed the first episode of the British series and an episode of our series. And we so outdid them in fact, what we said early on, I was saying about, we went to Jerry Offsay, we said, and we said in interviews early on, that we can only do the show if we match or outdo the British. We cannot do a whitewashed, you cannot have two guys kind of look at each other and we fade to black. They've got to.
Well, that's what the world was expecting. I don't like to think so much that necessarily that there was any competition.
No, there wasn't competition. But
Russell
I'm saying
was incredibly kind and generous and dear to us in giving us the show, letting us do
it was
what we
not competition.
want.
It just happened that way.
He warned us what we were in for.
Yeah, he
because
did.
He had been through it in England. He said, you need to know what you're getting yourself in for because people are going to hate the show and they're going to hate you. And he said, this show is trouble and you're in for it and you need to know that. And he was right.
So what was the response when it first aired?
At the beginning, we had a piece in Time Magazine and Newsweek. We got rave reviews to begin with, and then the gay press began to turn against it for whatever reason.
Well, I know why, but anyway, yeah, go on. Some of the press was very enthusiastic, and some of it was very negative, and that is to be expected when you do something that really gets under people's skin. It's either going to delight them or they're going to be horribly offended and frightened, I think, by it. I think, for me, speaking, my reaction to it all was that there was a conservative element of gay community, just like of any community. People who want to be perceived by the straight world in a certain way because they want to be accepted and to assimilate. And the image we were showing, some of it offended them, Brian's lifestyle in particular. We also had gay people on the show who were couples who were raising children, who had very traditional and conventional lives, but they mostly saw Brian. And I think that a lot of gay press, as Dan said, a lot of gay organizations, GLAAD in particular, HRC, this was not the image they wanted to put out while they were trying to get gay marriage passed in the United States.
In fact, the woman who ran GLAAD at the time, she was a very nice woman, and she called us. We had lunch with her, and she said, "I'm really sorry, but my donors say if you do not get Queer as Folk off the air or
if they don't
denounce it,
condemn it, they're going to pull out their
out,
financing."
Yeah. Also, Showtime ran in front of every episode, this little card that said, "This does not represent all gay communities. This is a very specific show about a very specific gay characters." And I think that Ron and I always said, one thing we were going to make it a celebration of gay life. It was going to be a story about boys turning into men, because in our experience, we noticed a lot of people who were leading a certain life when they're 20, and what's going to happen to them when they're 40s? They're taking drugs, they're promiscuous.
When they're young, but it's growing up.
But we knew people who some people left that and became successful. Other people couldn't get rid of it, their lifestyle, and they were. So this was part of it. And the third thing was that we were going to tell the truth. And as Ron always says, what do you say about the mirror?
Yeah. My reaction to this was that if you don't like the reflection you see of yourself, don't blame it on the mirror. And we felt, despite all the criticism and the anger and the hatred and everything else that show engendered, I never heard anybody say, "You're lying. That's not true."
Yeah.
Never heard that.
I think a lot of gay people were embarrassed. Like one person said to me, my mother could watch this show, and I don't want her seeing that. And I said, "Why? Because it's not truthful?" He said, "No, it's because it is truthful. I don't want her seeing that." And a lot of people in fact, I remember people were saying, if you're going to do a show about gay people, why couldn't it be about two gay doctors who live together in the suburbs, or two gay lawyers? And we always said, but Showtime didn't buy that. They bought Queer as Folk. And that was what we were commissioned to do.
It wouldn't be very interesting. If you did a TV series about my life and Dan's life, you'd be asleep in 5 minutes.
It wouldn't even be a 5-minute online series.
And what about the right? Did you get reaction from the religious right?
We thought
we would.
We thought we would. In fact, we had offices in Toronto and offices here in Los Angeles. And we said to Showtime, we need a security camera.
We weren't on a lot. We were in an office building. And back then, you could just go up in the elevator. They didn't take your driver's license and photograph like they do in buildings now. There wasn't that level of security. You could just go up in the elevator. And it was a solid door, so you had no idea who was knocking on your door. We said, we need to put in a camera outside the front door with a monitor on our assistant's desk so we can see who's out there. Because we don't know if anybody finds out where our office is and they come to cause any kind of problems. We don't have a guard booth like at Warner Brothers, like with Sisters. We're basically just vulnerable. So
and
we were very concerned about that. But
nothing ever happened, except we were on Larry King's show when he had his show. And the last segment of it was us with this right-wing nut that they found, who was going on and on about how horrible the show was. Larry just sat there, didn't say one word. When it was over, when they went to commercial, he turned to us and said, because of that, your show's going to run for years. And he was right. He was right.
So who was the intended audience, and what did the actual audience end up being?
It was intended to be a niche show for the gay community, just like Soul Food was supposed to be for the niche African American community, and what's it called? Resurrection Boulevard, Hispanic community. And it didn't quite turn out that way because...
No, well, women loved our show. We didn't understand that at the beginning, we were totally confused and surprised.
Straight women.
So very confused and surprised by it. But they turned out to be the majority of our audience.
And one woman wrote in, I remember she wrote us a letter, and she said, I love the show so much, and I pretend in my fantasy that I'm a gay man having sex with Brian. And I'm thinking, what? There's a psychological study here somewhere.
Well, we're trying to figure it out, and I don't know that I have ever really figured it out.
Was the romance of
I think
Brian
it
and
was,
Justin?
I think that the audience that appreciated our show, it's what Peter Page said, they came for the queer and stayed for the folk. And I thought that was the truest, cleverest way to express what happened. They liked the stories, they liked the love stories, they liked the
Characters.
family, they liked the humor, the heart, and the heat, the 3 H's that we associated writing that
Humor,
show.
heart, and heat. And sisters, too. We did the same thing.
And I think they appreciated it for the storytelling. And of course, there were a lot of nice-looking guys on the show, which didn't hurt. I remember going to the men's room once down the hall from our office over on Wilshire Boulevard, and there was there were other offices on the floor, and I was standing there, and one over was this man in a suit, and he knew that we were the Queer as Folk office, and he said he starts talking to me while we're standing there peeing, and he's saying, my wife loves your show. I said, oh, that's nice, thank you. She said, so she got me watching it. I said, oh. He said, yeah, I was really uncomfortable watching that stuff that you had those guys doing. I'm going, okay, I'm rolling my eyes. Okay, here it comes. He said, but after a while, I really started to love your show. I also got lucky. He said that's another reason he watched it, because he got lucky, because his wife was,
Turned on
by. I said, okay, great. He said, no, but I really loved your show after a while, and and the sex thing after a while, it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
It was no big deal.
Right, no big deal. I said those are the 3 words we were living for. No big deal, and that's why we pushed the sex. We said. And we knew what we were doing. We said, we're just going to show it over and over and over again until people get so numb and bored from it that they're not going to care anymore. And living proof. He said, after a while, well, it's sex, who cares? I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Because that is the thing that the world has a problem with and can't seem to get past. And there was this straight guy in a business suit telling me he was getting lucky and the gay thing didn't bother him anymore. And I said, well, that's what we were hoping for, seriously. And if it did that, then we sort of accomplished what we were out to do, to make that no big deal.
Right.
Yeah. So talk about Showtime's input and also what impact it had on the network.
Well, I think Queer as Folk was the show that put them on the map. It was their big hit. I remember Jerry Offsay at one point, he was so excited about it. He said, I want to put the show into perpetual production. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, you just, you have these writers go on hiatus and you just keep in. And I said, Jerry, we can't do that. Everybody needs a rest.
You never go off the air.
No, you never stop production. You never go off the air. I said, Jerry, you can't do that. But he was so, he said it. He said it out of his enthusiasm, and he had worked there Jerry was a great worker. His heart was in that network, and he finally saw something. And of course, Showtime was very competitive with HBO. They were the underdog, the little sister, the little brother who's never going to catch up. And this show was on Sunday night after The Sopranos on HBO, and Sunday night became a big.
Was it on?
No, it was on
10 o'clock.
No, Sopranos was on at 9 o'clock, and Queer as Folk was on at 10. And newspapers wrote about it. Media said Sunday night is an exciting night because you can see Sopranos and Showtime. And we would go to. It's funny. We would go to some of the not Pistol. What was it? Revolver. Originally, our bar was called Pistol, named after the Revolver bar.
There's a
And
bar
we had
in
to
West
change
Hollywood
it. Yeah,
called
and we would go there
Revolver.
on Sundays to see the show. It would be packed with people.
They showed it in bars.
And clubs.
And they're up in Canada too, in Toronto too. And it was fun going on a Sunday night and sort of standing in the back. Nobody knew. The actors would go in disguise. You know what an actor's disguise is? It's wearing sunglasses at night. Nobody will notice.
You're right.
Like, okay, so they're in the back, and so we would go and we would watch, and we'd be amazed. These guys were they loved it, and we felt so thrilled. Like,
And this talk about impact. This really created Showtime. It really did. It was their big hit. They finally got their big hit.
you know, ooh, are we out of time?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh,
Finish
okay.
what you're going to say.
Okay.
Does it? I see. It says shut them up. Okay, great. Yeah.
No, I forgot what I was going to say.
No, I said the impact.
But I was going to say one of the amazing things about television is it's so powerful. I learned a lot of this when I went to Annenberg School of Communications about the effect of television on people. And seeing a reflection of yourself validates your life. It validates who you are. It validates that you exist. Gay people had none of that. So for us, to see stories about us, our lives, it meant you exist. It was very powerful, very meaningful, and to see people, seeing themselves for the first time, really, in a way they'd never seen themselves before, not as a joke or the sexless neighbor, whatever. They actually see a reflection of your life. They were really affected, and we were too, because this was as new to us as it was to everybody else. Yes, we were writing it. Yes, we were the showrunners, but we'd never experienced this any more than the next guy.
But no one. That's why it was pioneering, because no one had ever done a show like this. I said the one-offs, the Brokeback Mountain's great, brilliant, whatever, but it's one-off. An actor commits himself to 6 months and that's it. This was, no one had ever. This was, and like with the sex, we'll talk about if you want to talk about the sex scenes. When we first did, we had to. We had to find out. We had to find out about this. So as going back to what I was saying about the first day of shooting, where Gail and Randy did this sex scene, and I don't think they had any. Maybe they had their underpants on or something, whatever.
We weren't there.
I was there, and they would say it's called hard wiring. So they're just the camera. They didn't have, and their monitors. Nobody else could see it, but I was there, and they were terrific. And we were all going into this together. What happened was the wardrobe mistress, who later was fired, but she was Irish, and she said to them, are you wearing your cock socks, whatever? And it was like the Garden of Eden after they took a bite of the apple. The magic, they were now realized that they were vulnerable, whatever. And so we had to go through the series of, cock socks and whatever. But anyway, so we had a scene. The sex scenes were not choreographed at all. It was just like, all right, get in there and roll around and whatever. Luckily, in the first scene, it was very specific about what Brian wanted to do to Justin. So that was specific, and they knew what to do. So we're at a scene where the Ted character was in a coma, and Brian came to see him and had sex with the orderly, right? And we had
in the bed next to him.
In the bed next. And Ted wakes up from his coma, seeing
and
Brian having
this.
sex.
Thought he'd gone to hell.
Right. So we had cast this. We had cast the role of the orderly, and we were in a real practical, once again, hospital at midnight, and we had to be out of there by like 12:45, and we started doing the scene, and Gail Harold pulled down his pants, and he had this, I can't even describe, it looked like a diaper to me, these white bloomers on, right? And then the orderly said, whoa, 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 I'm not doing this. What do you mean? He came to me and he said, I'm not doing what you want me to do. I said, Ross, our casting director, told you what to do. Well, no, he didn't, and I'm not doing this. And Noella, who was our production manager, came over to me and said, she always just said, you got 20 minutes, I'm pulling the plug. I said, oh my God, you weren't there, Ron. I said, oh my God, what are we going to do? So we got, somehow it became this dog's breakfast, as they say, of a scene. We got through, I got Gail to take off his bloomers, I got this guy to do, and I went to Sheila Hawken, who, like Kevin Inch on Sisters, was a wonderful producer. And she so helped us and supported us. And I said, you know, we can't go through, this was like the third episode. I said, we can't go through this. This is not right. We have to figure out how we're going to do these sex scenes. And what we did, we decided we would have a sex meeting with every scene. We would bring in the cast, or the guest cast, whatever, and our lead cast. We would bring in the director, of course. We would bring in the writers. The writers were not there.
DP was there.
The DP was there.
Tom was there.
Wardrobe, there was a wardrobe, the wardrobe person was there. And we would discuss the scene. We'd make sure everybody was comfortable, nobody did anything they didn't want to do.
It was choreographed.
And it was
Every
choreographed.
shot.
Literally, it was like, you're going to do this, you'll turn here. When you say this line, I want you to pull the shirt
And
off.
the camera
You do
will
that.
be here.
Camera will be here.
And we had a bargain with the actors. We will never ask you to do anything you're uncomfortable doing, and we will never show anything you don't want people to see. And we stuck by that bargain, and every sex scene after that was choreographed, and nobody was there except the people who needed to be there. It was a closed set. I never went to a sex scene in 5 years. There was no reason for me to be there.
No, I didn't go either.
And only the very small number of people were there to make sure that the actors were completely comfortable. They knew where the camera would be at all times, and they saw the dailies, and if they said, I don't want that, cut that, it was cut, no questions asked.
And I gained Gail Harold's trust because with the pilot, because our director, we said to the director, this one scene where the character of Brian, when he pours the water over his head and he says, well, you coming or going, whatever he's saying, and he's totally nude. And I said, you cannot shoot anywhere below his stomach. And when we did the scene, when the scene was edited, we gave the pilot only to Gail, because Gail had he was our leading man and he had to do all these sexual things. So I gave it to him, and Ron was not in Toronto. He was in LA with the writers, and he came. There was a banging on my door at the hotel in Toronto. It was Gail, and he was furious. And he said, I said, what's the matter? He said, look at this. Just look at this. We put it in, and there you saw some of his pubic hair. And I just said, Gail, calm down. I did an autonomous thing. I didn't call Ron. I didn't call Sheila. I called our editor, Bill, and I said, Bill, this is an order. I want this re-edited to, because Gail was unhappy. And that's how I earned his trust, because he knew he could come to me and he would not, it's not like you're telling him something, but we're going to use this because this will really exploit the. No, we wouldn't do that. And I think that they were very respectful, and I will always be grateful to all of them. Eventually, even Sharon Glass had a sex scene, eventually. In fact, I think once she said, where's my sex scene? But everyone had to do this, and they did it willingly and with a lot of, as I said, courage.
Yeah, I think people who saw the show and objected to it and found it, they would either say it was sexual exploitation or was soft porn. They would be very, disparaging of what we were doing. That wasn't the intention, and quite honestly, I would say, and I don't know, maybe speaking for Dan too, but I grew up my entire life watching TV, watching movies, watching straight people rolling around in bed, doing stuff, and to varying degrees, whether you're watching foreign film or an American film, depending on how much you saw. Never saw gay people in a situation like that. As I said, I never saw that reflection on television. That part of one's life that is very important. You can't just sever that part of your life and say it doesn't exist. It does exist. It's part of who you are. And to never see yourself the way you would see straight people. Until I was, how old was I, 45, 50 years old? I said, my whole life, I'd never seen this. I said, this is our one opportunity, and we're going to show it.
And you know,
I'm going to make up for all those years.
And Queer as Folk,
and we did.
Queer as Folk, when it premiered, this was an exotic world. It's not exotic anymore. You know, they're supposedly doing a reboot of it. The show Looking that was on HBO. I think it's lost. People have moved on, but in a way that's good because I don't think it's that interesting anymore. People are not that interested, and I think that's a very good thing. But at the time, it was very exotic a world to these people, to most people.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break.